All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. Today, we're going to talk about steel, aluminum, preparedness, and the continuing back and forth between the changing U.S. administration and the rest of the world, and basically what it means for you in your resilience journey. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. You know, I had to throw that summer beat in there because some of us who are ex-percussionists, I guess, I don't know, once you're a percussionist, are you always a percussionist? I don't know the answer to that question. But I grew up playing drums and percussion instruments as my thing as a youngster. And I love the sound of the hi-hat. There's just something about the sound of a hi-hat in a mixture, especially when you got the brush on it. Listen, welcome back to the awesome podcast that we've got here for you today. We're going to talk about some really interesting things, but first of all, I want to once again start out and thank everybody for your feedback, your continued patronage and listening to this podcast. Remember, this podcast, the Substack articles, and the YouTube videos produced twice a week normally when I'm not on vacation, and we're going to talk about that a bit, is our free service to the community at large, right? So we're here to provide you evidence-based, non-apocalyptic preparedness education to help you understand risk, identify it, and mitigate it, and continue your family along the resilience journey. In essence, you're just trying to rock your you-know-what, right? You're just trying to live your life, do your thing, pursue your goals, whatever it may be, and you're getting freaking tired of the world punching you upside the head. Just when you think you're ahead, just when you think you finally got crap figured out, something comes along and punches you. Well, welcome to the world of the Trump presidency. And again, I'm not going to sit here, and if you've listened to my podcast about this, what I talk about politics for trying to do two things. The goal is to first understand the why. I don't care what your opinion is on the current U.S. president, the current Canadian prime minister, or the current premier or state governor wherever you live. Couldn't care less, to be frank. And the world doesn't actually care what our opinions are. I want to know the why they're doing what they're doing. Emotional, ideological, and cultural reasons aside, you know, the buffoonery, etc. But why is this happening? What is the background intent? And the second part of that conversation then is, what's the so what? Like, why does this matter to me? And how could it impact, again, back to what I said at the beginning, your family's resilience journey, basically your life, right? So in essence, the purpose of everything that we do here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated, which is the parent company that owns this podcast, Inside My Canoe Head, is we're providing that non-apocalyptic, evidence-based preparedness education for you so that you're able to go chase your dreams and do what you want to do. And those are incredible, right? And I've talked about the greatest example that I love using is a young lady I met many years ago whose life goal is to be an artist, right? Oil painting artist, brilliant young woman. I don't know anything about art. I think her stuff is brilliant. Maybe I'm biased because I know her. Who knows, right? But I'm not an artist. I don't understand it. But she is an absolute passion, and all she ever wants to do in her life is to paint. But right now, as a new artist, or as so it was when I talked to her several years ago, she's not selling enough art to pay her bills. So what does she do? She has a Starbucks job, right? She's a barista. Loves it, very good at it, enjoys her work, but it's not her passion. But she understands that it's her responsibility to pay her own way through life, and it's her responsibility to set it up. So here she is trying to rock her incredible life, trying to chase her dreams, but every time the world keeps punching people upside the head. And it's for people like her that I say, okay, you can't control what one country's leader does. You can't control what your mayor does, your city council. You may not agree with it or otherwise. You can't control crap of these government organizations and international companies, what they do. Fair enough. I don't care whether you like that or not. Again, your emotional response to that is irrelevant. What I'm trying to say is, how do you continue to chase that dream of yours while the world keeps doing dumb crap? Right? Let's just be honest. Everybody's doing dumb crap, idiotic stuff, illogical stuff, whatever. I'm interested in the why because I'm just a curious nerd that way. But in the end, really what we're trying to do is to provide people advice, based upon evidence, not belief, not opinion. Again, Don La Poubelle with those in the garbage. They don't matter. I want to know what the evidence tells me why this is happening. And because when I understand what the evidence tells me why this is happening, I can then likely foretold, whatever you want to say, what likely is to happen. And then I can understand the impacts it may have on my family. And when I understand what those impacts likely are, then I'm in a position to say, okay, what is my available mitigation strategy? What can I do that's within my control to reduce the effects? And Donald Trump's recent announcement of 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel for all countries with no exceptions and no exclusions coming into the United States of America has a very specific intent and purpose. I don't care whether you agree with it or not. It's going to directly affect a lot of industries, especially in Mexico and Canada, that currently smelt different iron ore-based products and sell them, refine them to a certain part, and sell them into the United States of America as bulk goods that American factories then turn into, say, aluminum pot cans, right? So maybe the smelter that takes the iron ore and creates those rolls of aluminum sits in Canada. Now there's a business model where the Canadian aluminum manufacturer sells these rolls of aluminum to a pop can manufacturer in Michigan, and they make pop cans for all the major brands, right? Now with the 25% tariff, each one of those big rolls, which may cost, say, $100,000, is now going to cost the company in the United States, the pop can manufacturer, now has to pay $125,000 for the very same. It doesn't change the costs on the Canadian side. We still produce that for whatever with a profit margin and sell it for $100,000. U.S. The American manufacturer, though, has to pay the pop can manufacturer has to pay $125,000 to get that, $25,000 of which goes to the U.S. government into the Treasury and $100,000 to the Canadian company. Now, when you look around America, there are iron ore and smelters who produce aluminum, but they don't produce enough, which is why imports happen, right? There is an ability, an organic, integral ability to produce finer products, right? So steel refinement, that kind of thing in the United States of America, but it's insufficient for demand, and so international imports make sense. Now, the challenge that has been existing since the last 20 years is dumping. And dumping is where, I don't want to get into the long, detailed economic things and bore you to death. So it basically means that the Chinese government and some other countries, but principally the Chinese government, subsidize the cost of iron or pig iron, as it's called, mining and refinement into aluminum in China, and then they put it on the world market at such low prices that it simply can't, that no other North American or European manufacturer is able to compete with that price. So on an international playing field where there are no tariffs, everybody wants to buy their aluminum from China because it's cheap, right? Or the pig iron that starts the process is coming from China. And so when it's subsidized by a government, and listen, this is common in some industries, aircraft industries and a whole bunch of other stuff. It is. But when we look at one of the basic resources that are required for a functioning country, and Peter Zion talks about this in his book, The Accidental Superpower, and there's a recent 10-year edition that has come out. Brilliant book. If you're really interested in understanding how the U.S. economic model works and how these trade resources work, he's got a number of series, etc. And if you go to Peter Zion and you Google it, his geopolitics website comes up, and all of the charts and figures from all his books are there, downloadable, free of charge. He shares them with everybody. It's an aside basically to say that every country has a natural requirement for some basic inputs, right? In today's modern economy, energy is one, food is one, security is one, and so is iron, right? Because you just look around, look at the society around you, and look at all of the things that the world needs to just basic functioning of a country. Steel is one of them, and all the byproducts down the processing line. It starts as something called pig iron, and then it goes down the processing line as it's refined to dozens and dozens of different type of metals. So when the Chinese government subsidizes it, they produce a roll for 60,000 US. The Canadian roll is 100,000 US. So if you're importing it into the US, obviously you're going to buy the Chinese one. And so Canada's been playing that game, and they've been doing price wars back and forth. And basically, we've been trying to hold our own. Moving forward, there are two things to consider. One, the reason why this is happening, and two, what are the likely effects? The number one reason why is it's the belief of the people that surround Donald Trump and the people who support him, and a lot of geopolitical thinkers, is that each country has to have a certain organic capacity to create mission-critical items. The pandemic taught us that many countries, including where I live here in Canada, do not produce mission-critical medical supplies. So, for example, something like close to 90% of the world's generic antibiotics are made in India. And at one point during the pandemic, the Indian government said, you know what, we're going to put an export ban on these right now because we want to make sure our own people are taken care of. The same thing when it came to medical PPE. There wasn't enough produced in Canada to supply Canadians, and therefore we had to start importing it from various different countries at obviously exorbitantly, incredibly high rates that everybody that gouged the public during the pandemic. So you start to see that for a country's survival, international trade agreements are great. They help to subsidize and stabilize an economic trading model that allows countries to buy things on a stable market that they don't produce. But recent history tells us that there are critical things that when major events happen, international barriers go up in a second, treaties get thrown into the garbage, trade agreements get ignored, and countries take care of their own people, right? So which is why countries like Canada have been starting initiatives to create and subsidize the beginning of PPE production in Canada. We're looking at starting, or hopefully we were for a little bit, I don't know what the current political landscape in Canada, but to start the manufacturing of generic medications here in Canada, insulin, all these other things that we need to have as a country. One of the key elements for a country's survival is steel and aluminum. And the reason being is, historically, whenever a significant international spike in arms sales happens, so when we have the lead up to a global conflict, or a global conflict kicks off, and countries need to mobilize their industries, right? If you remember way back in the Second World War in your history books, you probably don't remember because most people listening to this podcast weren't around, but, all car companies stopped making cars. Appliance companies stopped making appliances, retooled their factories with government support to make the weapons of war, right? And the things that we needed to make sure that we won whatever conflict was coming. All those things require steel and aluminum. If your country does not have an organic, inherent ability within its borders to produce sufficient amount of steel and aluminum to mobilize the nation in support of a national war effort, you have placed a critical point of failure on your country's economic model. And as a previous podcast, I talked about national preparedness, right? And one of the things about national level preparedness is a country's ability to navigate whatever disruptions may be thrown at it through its own internal organic production. The idea behind spurring tariffs in the United States of America, the intent behind it is leveraging tariffs, and I'm not arguing whether this will be successful or not, but the intent behind it is to create the conditions so it's economically viable for countries or for companies to start increasing the production of American-made steel and aluminum, so that in the event that certain things happen around the world, America is able to have the production capacity already existing within its country to create all the steel and aluminum it wants. Now, this was the same argument that was brought out in the last round of tariffs, I think it was 2018, pre-pandemic, during Trump's first presidency against Canada. And Canada's argument back was, well, we're a good neighbor. We've been your best friends since, First World War, Second World War. Like, we're your buddies here. You're our greatest economic trading partner. We're totally linked, etc. But it missed the point of, that's great, but what if you get a government in Canada that changes its mind and says, you know what, the American government is going to war. They're going to war and we don't like it. They're going to go bomb and hurt people and we don't think it's justifiable. So because of that, we're not going to contribute to the U.S. war effort, and we're going to restrict or suspend export permits for steel and aluminum, right? At that point, should that happen, you've now placed or reduced the American governments and their ability to produce their weapons of war. And one of two things are going to happen. One, they're going to negotiate with you, or two, they're going to cross the border and occupy the factories and just take what they need. The point being here is that countries then insulate themselves against a foreign power being able to remove their ability to produce their organics. So there's a very real intent. What Donald Trump is trying to do is, already America is energy independent. Now, yes, I absolutely understand that they participate in the international exchange and distribution of oil, petroleum, and petroleum products and energy. Fine, I get it. But if you were to wall off the United States of America, they would be able to they have the ability to produce sufficient amount of petroleum and petroleum-based products that they would need in their society, and they can generate enough energy to support their industry and their population. That's what energy independence means. It doesn't mean you don't import. It doesn't mean you don't participate in the international system. It means, should the event happen, you have the ability to give the middle finger to the rest of the world, close your borders, and you'll be fine. Yeah, there's always going to be an upward price adjustment for doing that, but the point is you can. And this is the goal of industry-specific based tariffs, not the tariffs around fentanyl and human trafficking. We'll just set that aside. I'm talking about industry-specific tariffs that are designed without exemptions and without exclusions. It's based because they have to set the conditions, and they have to set the conditions long enough, because you're asking companies to make billions of dollars worth of investments in increased smelters, increased production, increased refinement capability within the United States of America to fuel an American manufacturing boom, under the auspices of being able, under the U.S. law called the Defense Production Act, being able to produce the necessary things in times of mobilization. You just can't put a tariff on for 6 months and turn and look at a steel smelting company and say, well, there you go. See, go spend $10 billion on a couple of new factories. They're going to want to see the fact that this is long-term and permanent. They're going to want to see the fact that I get that this is where we're going and that we're going to move forward. And with tax cuts associated with it, that may be the case. I don't know whether this will work with the U.S. smelting industry. I don't propose to be an expert on that, but I absolutely, without question, and understand why the Trump administration is doing this. What their goal is in steel and aluminum has actually been fairly clear. It's been the same as 7 years ago, when they tried this the first time around. And it's not the first U.S. government to attempt to put tariffs to initiate an increase in domestic manufacturing. Many presidents have done that before. The point being is that America is taking the steps and lesson learned from the past in trying to set itself up for, should the need arise to close off the rest of the world, or should events happen that interrupt the supply of goods from other parts of the world, that the United States of America as a nation will continue to be able to produce the goods and services that its population requires based on its own internal and organic capability. They'll still participate in the international trade system. They'll still participate in the international distribution system for a number of goods and services. But the intent here is to make America more self-sufficient. to make it less reliant on imports for very specific capabilities, which they believe in the coming storm, as people think is going to happen, will be useful. So that's the general understanding of why this is happening, right? So if we understand that this is probably, in all likelihood, to be successful, it has to be long-term. So basically put in, stop negotiating, stop talking, it's done, you're paying it, move on to the next issue. Now, countries like Canada, who produce that roll of aluminum for $100,000 and can't sell it now because an American company can make the same thing for $115,000, which before was too expensive but is now good, and Americans start turning. Now, what do countries do? Now, if it's long term, countries have to look at expanding their trade networks. This is not, and I'll give you my personal opinion based upon the evidence in the public policy literature. Okay? This is not about trade deals. This is not about cementing trade deals with other countries. This is about selling your natural resources and the products that are refined from those natural resources on the open market, right? For a Canadian company to sell a good overseas, it doesn't need a trade deal with that company. Now, what trade deals do is they normalize, they put a set of rules around everything, and they reduce uncertainty and put a certain degree in confidence in the strength of the trade. But Canada can still export aluminum rolls around the world without trade deals, right? They need export permits from the government. That's natural for anything that leaves the country. But the point is they can do it, and they need to do it. And the fact is, the Canadian government should have been doing it 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We've done an exceptionally poor job in this country of Canada of trade diversification, which means we've had a very convenient, very easy, friendly partner to the south that bought our goods at a discount because it was easy to sell to them, so they get everything at a discount. Now, the problem we have now is that world is changing, and yet we've done nothing over 10 years to prepare for this change. And if you've been a student of economic history around the world, you know this was seen coming, right? This is not an anomaly that's shocking people. Now, people like to be shocked because then it fills that void of, I didn't know about this, I didn't understand it, so I'm going to give you the shocked face to make it look like it came out of left field. But this has been the intent of the U.S. administration since Bill Clinton's time in the White House. And you can go all the way back to Ronald Reagan. The point is, this is not a surprise to anyone. The veracity and the speed at which it's happening is taking people a bit by storm. But if you didn't think this was going to happen and you think this is craziness, then you probably haven't been paying very much attention to U.S. foreign policy and the intent of it over the last 30 years. Understanding that is, countries now have to diversify. So 23 and a half minutes about that. What does this mean for you and your family? Okay? Very, very simple. It's the same exercise that I talked about a couple of episodes ago when we talked about how do you understand events that are beyond your control. You cannot influence them, but they are likely and potentially to have a significant and profound effect on you and your family. If you are in the steel and aluminum industry, if you are in a natural resource industry in Canada or any other country that has significant reliance on importing goods into the United States of America, you're at risk. You're at risk of your job being changed, altered, moved, reduced, or eliminated, which means there is a potential for a significant impact on you because losing your paycheck is probably one of the most significant things that could happen to people. Yeah, a little break in the podcast here. We'll get back to the episode in a second. We here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated are a Canadian company designed to provide for non-apocalyptic, evidence-based preparedness education for rational people. We sell books on Amazon, and we have a couple of video courses designed to help you and your family navigate this exogenous shock in the world. It's based basically a simplistic way of bringing together all of our knowledge in 7 different arenas together in some very useful courses that are available to you. And taking those courses, hey, they give you access to quarterly webinars that are literally the place where you can sit down with the policy experts in the area and talk about the issues of the day in preparedness, resilience, and building your entrepreneurial journey. So drop over to preparednesslabs.ca, check out all of our offerings there, and now back to the episode. So you have an economic risk, right? When you have an economic risk, you need to have a corresponding economic plan. Now, in a lot of the work that we've done here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated, we've created something called the trifecta of preparedness plans. The first 2 are dealing with natural disasters and how to navigate things that happen beyond your control. But the third one of your trifecta is your economic preparedness plan. What is your plan when you get fired? Because if you're not ready right now to walk into your job tomorrow morning and get fired, and you know exactly where you're going to swing fire to earn your next dollar, you know how to get an income, you know how to continue to pay your bills, you know how to make sure your family has everything that they need, then you're not prepared. And that's the definition of preparedness, right? It's not just for to have flashlights, batteries, and all that other crap. Preparedness is about your whole of life. Preparedness is understanding that there are a whole bunch of shocks that could happen to you and your family that are beyond your control and extends far beyond little supply kits and cute little messaging that you hear from the government. It's about you building resilience, which is your ability to navigate events beyond your control and reducing the impact that they have on your family. So basically, you're able to, as much as you can, navigate through it. And from the economic perspective, that means that you know that when you get fired, you're going to have your one-day pity party and your upset fest, but the next morning, you have a responsibility and duty to get your arse in gear, as we say in the East Coast, and get after it and earn another income. Sitting around filling out job applications and hoping somebody hires you is not a successful course of action. Hope is not a course of action. Very helpful. Hope's very good, but it's not a course of action that somebody will see your CV and say, wow, I'm so lucky to hire you. What is your strategy to earn income when you lose your current job? That's a level of preparedness. It costs you no money to consider. It takes a little bit of time. I say, your favorite beverage, a pen, a paper, and 30 minutes a month is all you need as part of our strategy that's in our books and our video course. Basically, your ability to say, when I get fired, it's going to hurt, it's going to be painful, it's going to be an emotional difficult time, but here's exactly what I'm going to do so that I can pay my bills. I don't need somebody else's check in my bank account to cover my stuff, and I can get after it. And now I'm going to go over and I'm going to earn an income doing this, and it's going to require this amount of education. It's going to take me this much time to be up and running. And say it's going to take 3 months, 4 months to get that new idea up and running where you intend to swing fire to earn income when you get fired. That then informs the answer to the question, what size emergency fund do I need? Now, Dave Ramsey says 3 to 6 months. Everybody throws a number out there. Our strategy at Preparedness Labs Incorporated here tells you that it's based upon your economic pivot plan. If you believe that you can pivot and start earning a new income within a short period of time, sufficient to cover your expenses and that you have for your family, then you don't need a larger emergency fund. But if you're going to swing over to a new industry that takes 4 months of training and certification, whatever it may be, then you need a larger economic emergency fund. That's the point, right? Don't just take a number at a pie in the sky that somebody tells you. Do the work, create the economic strategy, and that tells you how much money you need to have set aside to cover, because you know exactly what you're going to do. Unlike the vast majority of people in the pandemic, for example, who got fired, what did the vast majority do, right? And this is a clear example of what this doesn't work. They sat at home and waited for everything to go back to normal. That's what they did. And when it wasn't going back to normal in a matter of weeks, all of a sudden everybody, or a good portion of the Canadian population, and this was replicated in a number of countries, required government money to pay their bills. And then all of that government spending results in only one thing, which was the massive fight against the massive inflation that we had, and then we had to have a massive fight against it of raising interest rates. So the goose, the gander, and all that other stuff. The point being here is your responsibility is to understand the profession and role that you have in society. How exposed is it to the steel and aluminum? This is just an example, but it's a great idea to take a bigger holistic look at the industry you're in. How is your industry positioned against the influence of these type of things? And then it's the real adult thing to do in the room. If you don't own the company, why not have a conversation with the people who do about what it is their intent? It's the same thing as we talk about if you work in a restaurant and there's a fire in the restaurant and it burns down, what is the owner's intent? Are they just going to take the money, shut her down? Or are they planning to rebuild? And if they plan to rebuild, are they going to pay you during the rebuild? Whatever it may be, starting to have conversations with your employer and your business as to how they think they may be affected by an ongoing issue like steel and aluminum. It helps to give you information. Now, you may have ideas for them. It's great. The decision will be theirs. But when you have the conversation with people, you gain a bit of knowledge about what they're thinking, how they're framing the issue, what they may see as the big problem. And then you start to understand in your brain, hey, this informs me. This gives me an insight into my boss's or my company's intent. And that helps to fill your plan. The end result of all of this is that when you look at evidence-based resilience education or evidence-based preparedness education, evidence-based risk education, you can compartmentalize it and use whatever nomenclature you prefer. It means understanding the environment in which you live and how you've chosen to live your life. We do the same thing when we understand location-based hazards, right? I live in the city of Ottawa. It's an earthquake. We periodically get tornadoes and we get winter storms. We're getting something like 50 to 80 centimeters of snow, over 2 feet of snow in the next week. I live in an area. I choose to live here. I don't have to live here, but by choosing to live here, I by default accept all of the risks associated with living here. Fine. Nothing wrong with that. But I have to, if I want to be prepared and have a resilient lifestyle, I have to then take that information based upon my location-based hazard analysis to inform my family's preparedness plan, right? I need to understand how that affects how I want to live my life, and then what strategies can I put in place to mitigate against those risks. The same as you would do for location-based hazard, you do for economic-based hazard. You've chosen to work in an industry in which you work. You like it, you love it, or you hate it, and you're stuck in there. Whatever your circumstances are, you're in a certain industry. How is that industry exposed to exogenous shocks and things that are beyond your control, like other nation governments dumping tariffs on your industry? It's your responsibility to understand how your employment is positioned in the grander thing. Not that you can fix it, but that informs now you've got an employment-based risk profile. Add that to your location-based risk profile, you start to see where certain things expose you to an uncomfortable level of risk or an uncertainty that needs you to do something. That's how you identify risk strategies. That's how you build a preparedness plan. Not a freaking PDF downloader that comes off of somebody's website. It's about building your own risk profile. And from those risks, you then classify them at low, medium, high, which is what we do in our coursework and what we do in our online video courses, is you do that whole analysis and then you classify the risk, and then you produce a report that says, of all of the things that I'm exposed to in my life, here are the things that I've determined to be of high risk. A compartmentalized short list that now tells me, okay, I've determined based upon my life that these are my high degrees of risk that I'm exposed to. Now what do I do about that? That's how you make an informed, evidence-based preparedness strategy, not filling out your local government's form. I'm sorry. I understand the people. I know the industry, why it does that. I'm here to tell you this is the evidence-based strategy that we offer you free of charge here on the podcast, that we do in our YouTube videos when I'm not on vacation. And we'll close off this podcast with that. I was on vacation last week, and I want to tell this quick little story. I had the opportunity to cross Canada on the Canadian, which is Via Rail's 5-day, 4-night cross-Canada journey on a train. I have very few words to describe it other than epic, brilliant, and a bucket list. It is something that is not inexpensive, but it is something that you, if you're interested in doing, I would strongly suggest everybody to do. Just look up Via the Canadian. There's dozens of YouTube channels that have done reviews on it. The top ones, Kate and Nate, and a bunch of other ones have all done the review of this train travel. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you all the things that go on. It was a life-changing experience for me. I spent a lot of time thinking about life, the universe, and everything as I'm staring out a window of a train going by the incredible Canadian scenery. So not much was produced from the company, and the same thing's happening over the first part of February. So we're a bit wonky in February in our outputs. That's perfectly fine. I'm perfectly happy with it. We're coming around to the 1st of March, where we're going to bring you a whole bunch of incredible things. We're going to get into a steady state production. And again, everything here on the Substack, the podcast, and the YouTube channel are going to be the written audio and video format, all on the same idea, produced twice a week. Now, around that, the rest of the week, we've got a whole bunch of other things that go out on our Instagram Reels, our TikTok, and a bunch of other things on Twitter and at various different places. But our profound gift to the world is those 3 things that we produce twice a week to help you understand risk, resilience, and preparedness, the intersection of those, and how you have a duty and responsibility to take control of your life, set it on a roadmap, and go after your freaking dreams. Because they're not the same as mine. I may not understand them, but who cares, right? Instead of just surviving this chaotic world, why don't we choose to thrive, make the informed choice, and do the right things, because I believe you and your family are worth it. So thanks again for listening to this episode of Inside My Canoe Head. We are available across all platforms. If you have any questions about the podcast, drop over to our website, www.insidemycanoehead.ca. Everything you need is there. And I'll ask you to do one thing and one thing only for this podcast, is share it with somebody else. It's free of charge. There's no ads in here. I don't make any money off of this podcast. Simply send it out to people that you think would value the message. Give it a like, give it a share, give it a comment, give it a review, and then good, bad, or indifferent, give me your feedback. I appreciate it. Take care, stay safe, and have yourself an awesome time.